Hey everyone, it's 10 Types, and obviously in Pokemon TCG Pocket, the Pokemon EX are, well, they're the best cards, right? And they're also the hardest cards to get. And so I figured I'd talk about the best single point cards from Pokemon TCG Pocket. Single point cards are cards that are just not EXs. One term that's sometimes used, I use it some as well, is the term baby, which would be a Pokemon like, for example, Pikachu, right? Oh, let me find a build a Pikachu with the regular Pikachu. Pikachu EX, a lot of people would say the Pikachu deck as in Pikachu EX, the deck, but then there's also a regular Pikachu with Pikachu EX, so this is sometimes called Baby Pikachu, then this could be called Big Pikachu. I haven't heard the term Big Pikachu or like Big something used that much because you could just say Pikachu EX, but then in order to clarify what Pikachu means, people say baby Pikachu. So I guess we're taking a look at baby Pokemon, which aren't an actual mechanic in Pocket. So regardless, with that out of the way, we're going to be taking a look at the best single point Pokemon in Pokemon TCG Pocket, and we're going to take a look at the best 5 from each stage. This is within the metagame and also on their own. So for example, a card like Raichu is a good card, but it's only really good within the context of Pikachu EX and isn't super important to that deck either. I mean, Pikachu EX has 3 main builds and they're all pretty good, but they're all good because of Pikachu EX and Substrika, Raichu, and where's the other one? And Electrode all fill different holes. I'm not actually sure what this build is. I think it just plays some various different Pokemon. We see an Electrode and a Magneton here, and Raichu as well. But with the 3 different evolution lines, they're all okay, but on their own, they're completely terrible. And within the context of the deck, they don't add that much. They just plug in some minor holes as opposed to being a core part of the deck, compared to something like Gardevoir, which we'll get to later on in the video. But regardless, with the basic Pokemon, the first one we have is Hitmonlee. Hitmonlee is a really cool card for when fighting, doing 30 snipe to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. We've seen a lot of cards that do 30 to your opponent's active Pokemon for just 1 energy, and those cards are okay, but they're not particularly great. They're not really good enough. Hitmonlee, though, doing a snipe attack here is really good sometimes. I was talking about Zebstrika. Zebstrika is okay. It can hit the active as well, and I believe it has more HP as well, but obviously it's an evolution. Hitmonlee, though, on a basic, is a card with a bunch of utility, and basic Pokemon cards you can play 1 copy of, and it's what people call a tech card, and tech cards are really nice in some decks. And there's a deck, or I don't know if it's one deck, it depends how you classify it, but there's a variety of different basic Pokemon, some of which are fighting, including Hitmonlee. You could play colorless basics as well. And it's an interesting deck where you can use different options depending on the circumstances. You cannot choose to search out a basic Pokemon, a specific one, but you can use Pokeball to allow you to find your basic Pokemon easier. And of course, you can also start them. So they're much easier to get than evolution Pokemon. So Hitmonlee is a really solid Pokemon for as an option attacker. If your opponent has something like, say, a Ralts on the bench, also I'm not really counting a Pokemon like Ralts or Charmander. Obviously, they're not really good cards. They're played because they evolve into good cards. But those have 60 HP. Wait, Charmander has 60 HP, right? Yeah, so they have 60 HP. You can hit them on the bench to two-shot them if your opponent doesn't have the evolution, and the evolutions are both 90 HP or less, so if they don't have the stage 2, you can 3-shot them on the bench and knock them out before they're able to provide the threat level that they could be. It does depend on the circumstances. It's not always enough, and if they hit the stage 2, then it doesn't matter. But Hitmonlee is still a very solid card. Also, I do want to say, it does not say this on the card. In a regular TCG card, it would say it, but you do not hit weakness on the bench. So just keep that in mind. There are a number of Pokemon that are weak to fighting, and they're also Pokemon weak to lightning. I was talking about Zebstrika earlier, so do not try to hit weakness on the bench with them. That will not happen. Also, Giovanni does not increase damage from Hitmonlee, but generally it is a nice card. If your opponent retreats, then you can target that Pokemon as well. So it has a bunch of different options and is okay. Another good 1-energy attacker that is a basic Pokemon is Farfetch'd. This is the classic 1-energy Pokemon. I was saying there's a bunch that do 30 for 1. They are, I mean, they're worse than Farfetch'd, right? Farfetch'd is also 1 colorless energy, 44 and really good. It only has 60 HP, which is lower than a lot of the other ones we'll take a look at. I think 80 is normal for a fully evolved basic Pokemon, that seems like pretty normal. There's Hitmonchan and a bunch of the ones that do 30 for 1. they all have more HP than Farfetch'd, or generally have more HP than Farfetch'd, having 70 or 80 HP. But still very solid here. This is a Pokemon you can put into really any deck in the game. I mean, not Pikachu EX, but really anything else you could put it in, though I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And that's also true for other colorless basics that are 1 energy, like Meowth or Chatot, but those are ultimately cards that do you don't apply pressure to your opponent's Pokemon. Meowth does 10, but that's not much. And so Farfetch doing 40 is really, really solid. Your weakness Lightning isn't great, but ultimately Farfetch is a card that is super strong in some situations if your opponent isn't set up super well. If they're starting, say, a Ralts and they're going to evolve into a Kirlia, then you two-shot them, even if they do evolve. So Farfetch is a very, very solid card in a bunch of different situations. A lot of the stuff I said about Hitmonlee, the general stuff of it being good in as a tech attacker and in toolbox-style decks, it's arguably one of the defining cards of that style of deck. I've played against it I played against it a lot. In terms of decks kind of focused around Farfetch'd or a Farfetch'd box style deck, I played against them only a few times, but they seem interesting and are definitely a little bit scary. And we'll talk about that more with the basics. And then we got Druddigon. Druddigon's a really interesting card to talk about. I'm not exactly sure how good it is. It has its higher retreat cost, but it has higher HP and its ability Rough Skin. If it's in the active and damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, you do 20 damage in return. That's pretty nice. If you're, say, hitting into this with Farfetch'd, both Pokemon will knock each other out, but you're not even attacking or attaching energy here. So knock each other out after 3 turns. Of course, your opponent could could potion, but assuming they don't do that, you are knocking them out. Generally, you won't be taking knockouts with this, but softening up Pokemon to finish. It's played a lot with Gyarados EX. Personally, I don't love that combo. I mean, I think it's decent, but some people think it's like the best deck in the game or the best combo in the game. I don't think it's quite that good. But regardless, I do believe the card is good. It's been played in a lot of different decks. It's also a newer card from Mythical Island. I'd say a good chunk of these cards are actually from Mythical Island, which is really cool to see. But regardless, Druddigon is a card that is just, I mean, it's pretty solid. As an attacker, it's kind of awkward because it's a dragon type taking fire and water energy. How exactly will you play this? Like, you can't really attack with it in Gyarados EX because playing fire energy can be so bad for you. And then you can't really play it in a deck like, say, if you want to play Ninetales, you can't play Druddigon because the water energy would be super bad. But I do think there is a solid potential for this as an attacker as well, within like a toolbox style deck with like Farfetch'd and maybe some other colorless attacker. But overall, it's a really solid Pokemon. It can get stuck at the active because of its 2 retreat cost, though, which isn't ideal, but it also doesn't have a weakness. So generally a very solid Pokemon here with high HP on a basic, and it's something that isn't really a threat, like it doesn't do any damage if your opponent doesn't attack it, but it is theoretically very scary. Next Pokemon we have here is Marshadow, again from Mythical Island here. And it says for 2 energy, one of which is a fighting, and also has a 80 HP, which is okay. You do 40, but if any of your Pokemon were knocked out by damage from an attack during your opponent's last turn, it does 60 more. So theoretically, if they knocked you out, I actually don't know how they do it not using damage. I can't think of anything. If it was a special condition, that would not trigger it. That would be between turns, though. But then there aren't damage counters like there are in the regular TCG or instant KOs, and as far as I can think of. But regardless, Marshadow is a card that if your opponent takes a knockout, which they will take a knockout, or if they don't, then you just win. But if they do take a knockout, then you're going to be able to do a massive attack in return. This does notably one-shot Pikachu EX, but it's not just a Pikachu EX counter card. Doing 100 for 2 on a basic is absurd. If it just did that, that would be super broken. But it is able to do this consistently throughout a game. You'll be able to attack with Marshadow once, and also it's a massive threat as your opponent stares down Marshadow. They're thinking, what am I supposed to do about this? I need to make sure my board's set up, but then that gives the person playing Marshadow, you playing Marshadow, more time to set up as well. So you want something to take some amount of advantage by either using the setup time to, power up your board, get more energy, Pokemon, things like that in play, or by just doing damage, right? You could attack with some Pokemon that's stronger. They'll talk about the top single prize Pokemon or single point Pokemon here. Admittedly, I don't think like you could reorder these and I'd be fine. Really, any order. I think Hitmonlee's probably needs to be near the bottom. The Farfetch'd side also wouldn't put at the top, but any of the top 3, I think I could see a reordering. but the top one is Tauros here. This is a card I haven't really played with. I played against some though, and it's also pretty scary. It is colorless and it has 100 HP. Again, has 2 retreat costs like Drunigan, but that's still okay. But you're able to do 40 for 3 colors. But if you're against an EX, which as I said are really good, then you do 80 more, which again, one shots Pikachu EX, but certainly is not just a counter for that deck. Tauros is a really strong attacker against a lot of different Pokemon. And yeah, I mean, it just that simple. It's really strong. It's not the strongest Pokemon in the game. Obviously, Mewtwo EX is stronger, and Charizard EX and Celebi EX is often stronger, and Gyarados EX is stronger. I don't think I said that one. But regardless, it's still solid. Pikachu X hitting 90 is good. Tauros hitting 120 is also good. And it's doing massive amounts, massive as in most of the damage to most of the Pokemon I just named, not to Gyarados. Like, so if you want to say finish it off with Hitmonlee by sniping on the bench, then that won't work for all of them, but it'll work for most of them, assuming they don't potion on, say, Mewtwo EX. But it's really, really solid damage, and it's a Pokemon that is easy to power up. I mean, it's energy, but in terms of finding it from your deck, it's pretty easy. Finding it basic is pretty easy. You just get it set up, maybe hide behind a Druddigan, or I was mentioning Marshadow. You can threaten stuff with Marshadow. Then when your opponent sees the Marshadow, they choose to maybe wait a turn to get themselves set up, and then you get your Tauros set up. So there are different things you can do. The basic decks, the basic focus decks are really interesting. The single point basic focus decks are really interesting, and you have lots of different attackers, and using them to the best of your ability is what makes it strong. It's a deck I haven't really dipped my toes into too much, but it is a really interesting deck that is. You can mix and match these attackers. You can put them into different decks, and a bunch of them are fighting as well. So they are kind of like a backbone of the fighting archetype as well. But regardless, let's move into the stage 1 Pokemon. And first up, we have Primeape. I honestly don't think Primeape's that good. I think the other Primeape's actually probably better. But a lot of people think that a lot of people play this Primeape. Like looking at the decks in Limitless here, we see Aerodactyl Primeape, and the Primeape it plays is the new Primeape, which is kind of interesting, and it plays some Mankeys as well. It doesn't actually even play the promo Mankey, but regardless, you have the promo Mankey has less HP. This the same HP as this one, but after attacking has even less. Regardless, you have this Primeape, which does 50 for 1 on a stage 1, and that's very efficient, especially if you're hitting for weakness. It's even better. So ultimately, this card's good because it's an efficient stage 1. I'm actually a pretty big fan of Executor EX. It's a card / deck I really enjoy playing because of its solid, efficient, stable damage output. It's not the most consistent. I mean, you do flip a coin, but it's not the same as like Marowak. We could do 0 damage or 160, and it's only 1 energy, but that has a lot of HP. Primeape doesn't have as much HP, but only gives up 1 point and functions within a different type. So grass, you're trying to tank and heal, and then maybe set up Celebi behind it. But with fighting, you have those attackers we talked about. There's also Aerodactyl EX, Marowak EX, and some other ones as well. But regardless, Primeape is a card that can do solid, consistent damage, kind of like Rapidash. Rapidash is a very similar card to this because they are 1 energy, solid damage on a stage 1, except Rapidash, it does 40. Yes, it does more with Blaine, but you won't always have Blaine, so this is better than that in that sense. Primeape's a solid card that I see played a bunch, and I know people like it a bunch. Next up, we have Vaporeon. I'm actually not a massive fan of the Vaporeon-based decks because it's a card that really needs value, gets value when you have a bunch of different water Pokemon in play, but when you do, it's awesome. It allows you to pivot massively into really strong different attackers because water has probably the best set of EXs in the game with Starmie EX, Articuno EX, and Gyarados EX. They're so strong and good in different situations, and Vaporeon is a card that allows you to actually switch between them because they are all decently expensive. Starmie is 2, which is the cheapest. Articuno is 3 for its main attack, though it does have an attack 4-2, which is very meaningful. And then Gyarados EX is 4 energies and can potentially discard an energy from yourself, which is pretty common. Vaporeon is a card that has really, really awesome value when you get it powered up. It's really cool, really strong, really solid. Ultimately, a card that if your opponent has in play, you need to be aware of all the options it can bring up, and you really can't prepare for them, to be honest. Like, it can do so many different things, and it's a really, really cool card that I know some people really like. I do like it as a card as well. I think in the metagame right now, it's not great because you can't search out evolution, so you can struggle to get all of them up, but it is still pretty strong, especially with Articuno EX, which is a basic which you can get out of your deck easier. Next, we have Rapidash. I was talking about Rapidash, but not this one. This is the new one from Mythical Island. I'm personally not, I don't love playing this card, but I know it's pretty good. It does, on average, it does 70 for 2 fire on a stage 1, and you have 100 HP here as well. That's pretty solid within. I'll just talk about the next card as well, which is Ninetales. Ninetales is pretty good for doing 90 for 2 fire, but it discards 1. Rapidash does not discard and has more HP, and also one of them is colorless, which doesn't really matter. But obviously you can use a Blaine with either of these. Rapidash does not have consistent damage output because of the coin flip, and so playing Blaine or not can kind of get weird, but with Rapidash you have potential to one-shot a few more Pokemon than Ninetales, and also you have the potential to attack and set up Ninetales behind Rapidash, or another Rapidash of the same type behind this one because you're not discarding energy, and energy can be an issue with Ninetales. And also the other Rapidash isn't great. It's okay, but 40 for 1 isn't great. 70 for 1 is, I mean, that's good, certainly quite good, but it's a card that, you know, you're not always doing 70 for 1. Doing 120 for 2 and Ninetales is way better. But this Rapidash is definitely a really solid card. And Ninetales is really consistent. I think it's a really great stage 1 attacker, and I was considering putting it at the top. You're able to do a really solid amount of damage because of the fact that you have to pay this cost of discarding energy. You're able to do more than, say, I mean, Aerodactyl EX does 80, and that's an EX, and you're doing more than that, and you're a 1-point Pokemon. So Ninetales is just a really, really strong, consistent attacker. I guess a similar Pokemon would be like Golduck, which is 70 for 2. Then we have Weezing as the top stage 1 single-point Pokemon in the game, in my opinion, because its ability Gas Lake is really solid, and its HP at 110 is pretty tanky for a 1-point Pokemon. In my opinion, I don't know if it's better than Druddigon as a wall. You could go either way. Ultimately, Druddigon's more universal, but Weezing actually, does damage without your opponent attacking you, so it does apply some form of pressure. And also, using it with its attack, it's way easier to power up. It's 30 for one darkness and applies decent pressure. It's 30, but then you're guaranteed an extra 10 due to poison at least, though maybe some more. But ultimately, Weezing a really solid card, especially with Koga, allowing you to scoop it up, which allows you to both switch and heal, which is really, really nice. Unlike Druddigon, where you have that we use Leaf. Leaf is obviously a more universal card. Koga really only works with Weezing. It also works with Muck, but that's just like not good. It's not good. In terms of a combo, it's bad because of Muck's high attack cost. But with Weezing, Koga is really nice, but then Leaf is good with Druddigon, but does not offer that healing aspect. And then in terms of another wall, there is Mew EX as well, which does have higher HP than both and is a basic. Needs Budding Expeditioner, which is the same as Koga. They work on different Pokemon. Budding Expeditioner literally only works on Mew EX, but that is a card that if it gets one-shotted, it gives up 2 points, which isn't ideal. Sometimes you just leave Weezing in the active and it gets knocked out, and that's okay. Weezing also does set up another card, the Arbok. Arbok, I think, is a decent card. I was considering putting it in. I actually think it might be better than some of the other cards we talked about, the stage 1s, but it's ultimately a card that is kind of outclassed, as we'll talk about in a moment. But Weezing, 100% a card that I would recommend that you play. Someone commented saying that Weezing, they thought that was the best single-point Pokemon. I wouldn't quite go that far. I think it's good, though. It's definitely strong, and it's a card that's good against Mewtwo EX. That's always a nice hitting weakness there. But another card that is a Darkness Pokemon is Scolipede. Scolipede with 140 HP is obviously high, not necessarily for stage 2, but it is definitely tankier than most of the other cards we looked at. And it also has its attack of Finish Shock, which does for 2 energy, one which is a darkness, 70, but if your opponent's active is poisoned, it does 70 more. And also the Whirlipede does poison with its attack, it does 20 in poison, which is pretty solid. And this is better than Muck and better than Arbok, essentially objectively. However, it isn't able to, I mean, it's a stage 2, right? So it's not as fast or consistent, but ultimately Scolipede is definitely a card that is really scary when set up, because this can do 120, and that's not necessarily enough to one-shot all the Pokemon, but is enough to all the EXs that see play but it's enough with poison to one-shot a few more, and also you do hit weakness, so you can one-shot Mewtwo EX, and there's only a handful that you're not one-shotting, and you're a one-point Pokemon, so I'll keep that in mind. You can use the Weezing Koga combo into Scolipede to pull this off, but you don't have to. You could use Leaf there, or you could use Whirlipede, or you could just manually retreat Weezing. That can happen. It is a wall, as I said, so you could theoretically get the 3 energies on Weezing and the 2 on Scolipede. That's not, particularly likely, but that is a thing that could happen. But ultimately, Weezing is really good. Scolipede is able to make good use of it as well and be a real threat. Arbok isn't really a threat. There are times when you just come up short, and Mach doesn't really set up. I'm just going to be completely honest, that barely ever sets up. But Scolipede is a card that sets up pretty nicely and can work without Weezing as well because of Whirlipede. Even just 70 for 2 in a stage 2, obviously not the best. I mean, it's actually not that bad. We'll take a look at some other stage 2s that are more support focused, but Scolipede's damages without the poison actually pretty comparable. So Scolipede, just even without any poison, it's okay. Certainly can cause problems for some decks, but probably won't. But regardless, definitely a really cool deck that I would recommend checking out. It's not the strongest, but it's decent. It's like pretty highly played too. It's the 5th most played. It doesn't have the best win rate, but it's not bad. I'd say comparing it to Dragonite, which is a deck that was a stage 2 that was not great but was really fun. This one might be less fun than Dragonite. I'm not sure, but it certainly sets up much better and is better than it by a noticeable margin. Then we have Golem. This is another stage 2 deck that's from Mythical Island. As I said, a lot of these cards are from that new set. The mini set, by the way. And so Golem is a really interesting card. I haven't really played it much. I've played against it some. It's really scary when it gets set up, and it's really hard to knock out. It has 160 HP, which is awesome for a single point Pokemon. And its attack says says it takes. I can't speak. It says it takes 30 less damage from attacks from your opponent's Pokemon next turn. It does 120. This is for 4 energy, which is a lot. You can accelerate to it with Brock, but Brock accelerates to Onix and Golem. Onix is just a different Pokemon. Golem, but not Graveler, not Geodude. So this will take like quite a few turns to get powered up, and you need to get a little lucky, like getting your Brock. You don't need Brock, but Brock is good. And then obviously you need the stage 2. And every stage 2 is awkward to set up. I don't think Graveler is particularly good. And it's not like I think Whirlipede is better than Graveler. I think Whirlipede is an okay stage 1 that can kind of hold its own. I don't really think Graveler is in that same vein. Whirlipede is not great. It's not great at holding its own either. But regardless, Golem is a card. Well, also with Whirlipede, you also have Weezing to actually do stuff before before the Scolipede setup. But with Golem, do you have something like that? You could play Druddigon. I guess a lot of the Golem must play Druddigon. As I said, I think I like Weezing more. Regardless, Golem is not a bad card. It's a pretty scary card when it's set up. It's definitely super scary. Comparing it to Scolipede when set up, it's way better. It's more energy, but it's way better. It's almost impossible to knock out, and it's almost impossible to one shot, but it's very difficult to knock out, like even two-shotting. A lot of decks just won't be able to do it, especially if it's healing. And also it's doing really big damage in the meantime. So it's a really, really insane Pokemon when set up. As I said, hard to set up. As is with all these stage 2s, but especially this one, which takes a lot of energy, but still definitely a really, really solid stage 2 that I know some people like a lot. Lastly, I guess we have 3 stage 2s, and 2 of them are together. We got Superior, and Gardevoir I do think is Gardevoir isn't like the best deck. It has Mythical Slab, which is a really solid item that's just super important to Gardevoir. Superior and Gardevoir are both really similar cards. Superior is paired with Celebi EX, which is a top deck in the game, and Gardevoir, which is the top deck in the game, or the second best deck in the game. I think you could go either way there between Pikachu and Gardevoir. I know, so as I said, some people think Gyarados is the best deck in the game. I think Gyarados is number 3 here. I think it's probably in the same tier as Pikachu and Gardevoir, but I would put it below both those decks because it just lacks the consistency that they have. Pikachu has it because it's a Pikachu. It's a basic Pokemon for 2 energies, and you just need some other basics, which are not hard to find. Then Mewtwo EX is harder to set up, but with Gardevoir, you can get that with Mythical Slab. The Mythical Slab is not as good as Pokeball, even ignoring the type-specific aspect, but it does allow you to get Gardevoir easier. But the idea is the exact same with these two. You use Gardevoir to power up a basic EX, you use Serperior to power up a basic EX, and they essentially add an extra energy. They let you do 2 energies every turn. Superior will not stack versus Gardevoir will, but Superior has a stronger attack and it allows you to get value off the energies you're already attached. Gardevoir can split up your energies. Um, if whichever you think's better. It's splitting hairs, I feel like, except for the fact that Gardevoir has Mythical Slap. So Gardevoir I will put above it, but you could say that isn't really the case, that they're more or less like very, very similar. But then the last single point Pokemon I have to talk about is Greninja. Greninja has its ability Water Shuriken. Greninja, I mean, it's played within Gyarados EX. I think the combo is okay. I think it's not the. I think there is more potential in both of these cards, but in the future. But right now, putting them together is very solid. Greninja allows you to sprinkle in some extra damage, and the Gyarados EX and Druddigon both can tank hits. Greninja can take advantage of the tanking hits by placing extra damage counter or putting extra damage into play through its ability, and it can stack if you have multiple Greninjas. Very hard to do, but if that happens, you're in an awesome position. And then you also have Mist Slash, which is 60 for 2, which is not bad. It's actually kind of important sometimes. And so you can use that. It's not a great attacker because you only have 120 HP, which for a stage 2 is, well, is bad. Some we just looked at had 110, which is also bad, but regardless, you have Greninja. Also, the pre-evolutions are colorless and are also just 1 energy, so that's pretty nice. But Greninja here doing very, very solid extra damage, kind of like how Weezing does extra damage, except now you can finish off Pokemon on the bench. So you take the stuff from Weezing and Hitmonlee and package it together, and all of a sudden you have this Pokemon that can get great value from anywhere on the board, assuming it's on the board. If we get a card like Mythical Slab for water, I think Greninja will shoot up, and that'll mean Greninja Gyarados will be even better together because they are both the same type. Yes, they use the same type of energy, but Greninja as an attacker is important within the deck. It's certainly not something to completely write off, but it's not. I wouldn't say they're a match made in heaven or anything like that. Obviously, Mewtwo EX and Gardevoir are, and Celebi EX and Serperior are, but I feel like Gyarados EX Greninja is a combo, kind of like Pikachu EX Zebstrika, where they kind of cover for each other's weaknesses, but they're both just good cards. Zebstrika is not that good. Pikachu EX is definitely better than Zebstrika. That's why Pikachu EX has all these different partners, but they're just good cards that are played together because they're good. Also, same thing with something like, say, Starmie EX and Articuno EX. They're both good cards. They do both synergize with what's the card number? Misty. There we go. I was blanking on it for whatever reason, but it's not like they're cards that actually have synergy together. But regardless, Greninja is super good. You can put it with lots of different things. It's a really fun card that I highly recommend you try out if you have it. You probably have it. It was offered for free. I actually had. Yeah, I pulled the Froakies and Frogadiers, and the free Greninja event happened. But regardless, tell me down below which single point Pokemon you think is your favorite. I keep wanting to say single prize, but there are no prize cards, they're just points. Greninja, though, is my favorite, definitely. Weezing is also one of my favorites, but there are a ton of cool ones. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Consider liking, subscribing, hitting the bell, all the good stuff. And as always, I'm excited to see you in the next video.